It's the return of the weekly mailbag. I'm answering listener questions on wide receiver, the NFL draft, and more on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com, and I thank you for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, please give it a thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Today, we return to the weekly mailbag. Most weeks, we try to do a listener mailbag show on Wednesday. We missed it last week because of all the free agency action. So let's begin, and our first question deals with the wide receiver position. I know you coveted a veteran receiver this offseason and understand your points, but this offseason had a lot of overpays, and you always talk about value being key in free agency. I think the Jets did not see value due to cost and pivoted to other positions. That said, which player would you have taken at a higher value than they received, and why? Crowder seems like a good example. Well, yes, I do think value matters in free agency, and I think that teams make big mistakes when they get into situations where they are constantly overpaying. I do think, however, there are certain situations where a strategic overpay makes sense, and overpay is a very relative term, and it differs from team to team. There might be a player who's much more valuable to one team than another. And for a team like the Jets, I feel like the price at a receiver that's acceptable is probably higher than a lot of other teams because of the specific situation that you're in. Because you're talking about a team where you're trying to develop a second-year quarterback who had a lot of issues last year. It was a struggle for Zach Wilson. And this is a big year. And I think Zach Wilson needs all the help he can get. And I think it's on the Jets to give Zach Wilson all the help he can get. And this is not a great group of receivers on paper. If we're being honest here, I mean, this is a team without a guy who's ever had a 1,000-yard season in the NFL. This is a team with literally one player who's had a 600-yard receiving season in the NFL. So that's the type of situation where you have a lot riding on this quarterback, where this quarterback needs a lot of help, and you don't have a lot of the receiver position. The Jets should be willing to pay more than other teams. If you're talking about value, receiver's more valuable to the Jets than it is a lot of other teams. So yeah, I get the argument that in a neutral scenario, maybe some of these moves wouldn't make sense financially, but I'm not talking about going crazy here. I'm not talking about overspending constantly at other positions. I'm talking about one player. I'm talking about bringing in an experienced receiver who's got a good track record in this league, because this is a dicey situation right now for the Jets at the receiver position. And I think that they may look back on this and regret what they've done or not done here, because you look at this and it could work out. I'm not saying it's impossible for it to work out. You've got a very promising player in Elijah Moore, and I'm presuming they're going to draft somebody early, at either 4 or 10, maybe a Garrett Wilson, maybe a Drake London, but that's a lot to ask. I wrote an article about this on Saturday over at GangreneNation.com, and my point was not that this is destined to fail. It's that it's a very risky approach in a situation where I feel like the Jets should be more risk averse. I think that their approach to this has been very nonchalant, and going beyond the top end talent. Right now, we're one injury away from Jeff Smith being a starting receiver for the Jets. So, are we going to go through 17 weeks without suffering an injury? Because unless we're doing that, we're going to be putting in a guys who really can't play. If Jets suffer any injuries at the receiver position, they're going to have issues. And again, you can look to the draft, and listen, I think the Jets should absolutely be looking to draft a receiver this year. Even if the Jets brought in a veteran receiver, I think they should be looking to draft a receiver this year. But I'm always hesitant about expecting big things out of a rookie, and the Jets need immediate production at the receiver position. And they need Elijah Moore to step up. And I'm not saying Elijah Moore is incapable of stepping up. I think Elijah Moore has the potential to maybe be that kind of 1,200-yard receiver. But whenever you're asking a guy to do something he's never done before, there's an element of risk in there because, maybe Elijah Moore is we know Elijah Moore can play in the NFL. We know he's going to be a good receiver in this league, but we don't know how good yet. And you're making a big projection. And it's one thing to make a projection. It's another thing to say, this projection has to work out or we got problems. So I look at what the Jets are doing and I do listen, if you want to tell me, let's wait and see how it goes. Okay, fine. I'm willing to do that. We'll see. Maybe the Jets have a good plan here somewhere along the line. But, we get to the season. I don't want to hear, the Jets, I don't want to hear Joe Douglas at a press conference after the year if things don't go well. I need to do a better job. Well, you needed to do a better job right now. So, we'll see. For me, but this goes deeper than like passing on guys because of that. I don't think the Jets passed on guys because of value, because it doesn't really seem like they were in on any of these guys. It doesn't seem like they've been in on any veteran receiver. It's one thing if, they were going after guys and they struck out and they said, well, this guy's not really worth the value. It just doesn't seem like they were interested in anybody. Now, the receiver market did not end up being as good as it looked on paper, and that's always the way it goes, but it seemed like there was a stretch there where maybe Chris Godwin was going to hit the market. Obviously, Calvin Ridley got suspended. He could have been an option. So the options were less than it seemed like they would be at the beginning. The guy that I think was pretty logical, the guy who seemed like the best fit would have been Amari Cooper. And, in a world where Christian Kirk's making $21 million a year, is Amari Cooper at $20 million a year really that outrageous? I don't think so. The guy I probably would have overpaid, and he would have been difficult to land, Devontae Adams. Just because it goes beyond what he brings to the table. I feel like adding a Devontae Adams would have restored credibility to this franchise in a way that few other players could have, adding a premium player. But yeah, I don't think Crowder got overpaid. Crowder got $4 million from Buffalo, and for where things were, I think as an insurance option, if nothing else, he would have been a good option to have. So, the Jets are going very young at this position. We talk a lot about the difference between the big picture ideas, that kind of like the plan Joe Douglas has and the execution of the plan. And through the first couple of years, I think there's been a lot of consensus that the plan looks pretty decent. The execution has sometimes been lacking. This is the type of situation where I feel like the plan on paper doesn't seem that great, because it's not that the plan can't work. Any plan conceivably could work, but one of the things I judge general managers on is, what's my plan? Because as a GM, not everything you do is going to work. So how many different possibilities have you created for success? If my plan A doesn't work, what's my plan B? If my plan B works, what's my plan C? Joe Douglas has not really given himself a great plan B here. And his plan A could work, but it's very risky. And I don't know that this is the spot where you want to take a risk. So, listen, if you want to, again, you want to say, let's see this play out, fine. I'll let this play out, and I'll reserve my judgment. But I'm saying it right now. This is not the spot where I would take a risk if I was Joe Douglas. He's willing to. I don't know that that's what I like. All right, our next question. This offseason has been one of the most unbelievable in memory. So many new quarterbacks joining new teams and dynamic swings in teams' playoff potential. In my opinion, the AFC has gotten ludicrously more difficult this year as a result. Wilson and Watson are going to playoff contenders, and the Chargers, Colts, Ravens, and Bengals have made marked improvements to their teams. What do you see as a successful year for the Jets next year? I had been in the 8-9 win and meaningful games in December camp, but should I adjust my expectations given the dynamic swing of this offseason? The AFC just seems like such a gauntlet, and I have trouble seeing how the Jets will be able to compete. Well, I think it's a difficult question to answer because it depends on what you mean. Realistically, if you look at this roster right now, it might be tough to compete in the AFC because they're going up against a very difficult slate of quarterbacks. And you look at the roster right now, is it realistic to expect this to be a playoff team? I'm not sure, but again, in the bigger picture view, why should we not expect this to be a competitive football team? I think, meaningful games in December, 8-9 wins. I don't think that should be a lot to ask for where the Jets are at this stage of their rebuild, because this is year 3 for Joe Douglas. Year 1, year 2, I argued quite a bit that, maybe people were being a little too hard on him. I think maybe people underestimated how long it was going to take him to get out of all these bad contracts. I mean, Joe Douglas came in at a very odd point of the Jets cycle where he was very limited those first couple of years. So they had to get bad contracts off the books, and it was going to take time, and it was not going to be easy to put even a competitive team on the field those first couple of years because Douglas really couldn't have Douglas really did not have a lot of room to maneuver because they hired him right after Mike McCagnon tied the Jets into all these commitments. Well, those are gone now. There are no more long-term McCagnon commitments on the team. This team doesn't have the dead money of the bad McCagnon deals on the contract anymore. And beyond that, if we're talking about like a slow and steady rebuild, if we're talking about building around inexpensive young players that you've drafted, well, after this season, Joe Douglas's first draft class is going to be 75% of the way through its rookie contract. His second draft class is going to be halfway through the rookie contract. So when are we expecting to see results here? And the thing about the NFL, things change very quickly. Last year we were kind of at the beginning stages of this rebuild. Douglas was finally beginning to put his touches on the team. Jets had the youngest roster in the NFL. That's not going to be the case this year. Douglas now will have 3 draft classes. And now, this year's rookie class, you never know what to expect out of rookies. But he's going to have 2 full draft classes with at least 1 year of experience under their belts. It's not going to be the youngest team anymore because all the guys they drafted last year are a year older. They've brought in a lot of veterans in free agency. This is probably, I would guess this is probably going to be somewhere around the middle of the pack age-wise. And you're not going to have 6 rookies in the starting lineup this year. So it's going to be an older team. This is not going to be the youngest team in the NFL anymore. And he's had a chance to spend a lot of money in free agency. So if we don't get results this year, why is that acceptable? Last year wasn't a great year. I think last year going 4-13 was a failure. It wasn't the type of failure, though, that makes you reconsider everything. If the Jets aren't competitive this year, if the Jets aren't in the playoff mix, if the Jets have another season where they're out of the race by October, and you got 3 draft class from this general manager on the team, along with free agent spending, no dead money from the previous GM. Listen, I'm not defending the previous GM. I've stated many times that there were issues with this team. He ran the team into the ground. Douglas had to clean up the mess. Well, the mess is cleaned up now. So, realistically, if you're looking at this roster compared to what the other teams in the AFC are building, maybe it'll be difficult to compete, but here's the problem. It shouldn't be difficult to compete. The Jets have had enough time. Joe Douglas has had enough time to build a quality roster now. So I think the excuses are gone. I'm not saying the Jets need to be a Super Bowl team this year, but if the Jets are not competitive in year 3 of Joe Douglas, then I think we got issues, and I think we're going to have a bigger discussion about the direction of this franchise going forward. So, I understand the need for patience, but I think we've been patient, and I think we're at the point where expecting some results. I'm not saying Super Bowl, but expecting some results. Pretty reasonable request, I think. And the way the Jets will get those results, one of the ways at least, is through good drafting. And ahead here on this mailbag edition of Locked On Jets, you've got a couple of questions about the NFL draft, and I'm going to answer them. The NFL draft is ahead in a few weeks. We'll see who goes number 1 overall, but I got to tell you, if there was ever a draft for protein bars, there's no question Built Bar would be the top pick because Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. The bars are all covered in 100% chocolate. They may be protein bars, but they don't taste like them. They're absolutely delicious, and there are so many delicious flavors. Mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month is white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it. It will be delicious, and it will be good for you because most Built bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So in Built Bar, you got the best tasting protein bar on the market. You got a bar that's good for you. So go check out Built.com. You'll see all the flavors. You'll find the best one for you. Again, that's Built.com, BUILT.com for delicious Built Bars. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms. We continue with our weekly mailbag. How confident are you in mock draft and big board evaluations this year? Besides a handful of players, values have been all over the board this year more often than others. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a sign that this is not a year full of elite talent. Every year in the NFL draft, typically at the very top in like the first round, there's a pretty broad consensus because there are players who like anybody can see is going to be great. You know, you can see it, I can see it. If you and I can see it, the pros can see it. So there's usually not a lot of variation between the early picks, like in the first round, and then once we get later in the draft, sometimes you'll see like one big board from a media member has a guy that's a third round pick, somebody has a seventh round pick, the same player, because once you get past the guys who are really obvious, they become much more difficult to scout. And in many situations, it comes down to just, are they a good fit for a certain scheme? Are they a good fit for a team's system? Are they going to be a good fit in the locker room? There are things that just are very difficult to judge, and it varies from team to team. A guy could be a great fit for one team and a horrible fit for another team. So the fact that the big boards are all over the place this year, it kind of is a sign that there's not a lot of elite talent in this draft. It reminds me a bit of 2013, which was a draft where the perception was that there wasn't a lot of top-end talent. And it was true. But you can still find talent in a draft like that. I mean, that was the draft DeAndre Hopkins went. There were lots of good. Travis Kelce went in that draft. There were lots of good players in the 2013 draft. You just have to be able to find them. A lot of this comes down to scouting. A lot of it comes down to understanding what you're looking for in your system. And a lot of it comes down to, in a draft where there's not a lot of obvious elite talent, a lot of it comes down to front office and coaching staff competency. Again, understanding what you want in a player, understanding what you want in a given role at a certain position. So, yeah, I think there is a lot of variation this year, and the teams that are right are going to be the teams that are smart. Again, anybody can find like the best player in the NFL. I mean, you or I can probably figure out who an elite player is going to be at the top of the draft. Once we get past that elite talent, though, it takes a little more skill. There's a little bit more that goes into it. So, I think that's probably the sign there. Next question. I've seen projections about Joe Douglas wanting to trade out of this year's first round and perhaps pick up a first-round pick for next year. Even though the Jets have 4 picks in the top 38, I think trading down this year and getting another first-round pick this year makes sense, even if the class is very light. We need players, and we cannot push this bus another year down the road. What do you think? Well, I think when we're talking about trading for a number 1 pick next year, it's not like the Jets are going to trade a 2022 first-round pick for a 2023 first-round pick straight up. I think what the Jets would be doing is they'd be trading down, and they'd get a 2022 first-round pick, and in addition to the lower 2022 first-round pick, they'd add a 2023 first-round pick. Now, if you want to add like if you want to trade down and get 2 first-round picks this year in return, I mean, there's a very limited number of teams you can trade with. Like Philadelphia is one, but there aren't many teams that have multiple first-round picks they can trade you for this year. But I actually think that this is one of the great market inefficiencies in the NFL because there's a value that's placed on, there's a premium that's placed on picks this year over next year. Next year's picks are always viewed as lower value. And in some cases, that's probably true for teams because you have a GM who's like trying to save his job. So the GM looks at this and says, well, I may not be here next year. I need to improve the team this year. So the pick this year is more valuable. But the thing is, like, in the long run, next year always comes. And the first-round pick's always valuable. So listen, I'm not saying the Jets should just trade a 2022 first-round pick straight up for a 2023 first-round pick. I don't think that would make a lot of sense. But if you trade down and you get a lower first-round pick, and in addition to that lower first-round pick, you get a pick next year, there's always going to be value to that. And you're still got 4 picks in the top 38. So all you've done is you've increased your team's draft capital in the long run. So I don't have a problem with that. I think that's perfectly acceptable. I think that's a perfectly fine way for the Jets to go about things. Next question. Do you think Joe Douglas has plans of drafting safety, linebacker, and wide receiver with those picks since there are still holes at those positions on the roster? Well, I think that it kind of feels like there was some strategy in free agency where Douglas kind of addressed the areas that maybe weren't as strong in the draft, and he kind of left the areas that have a stronger draft class, relatively speaking, unaddressed because maybe he's going to focus on those positions in the draft. Receiver's one of them. And again, I don't know that I agree with what he's doing there, but I think that's probably the thinking. There's a difference between this is what he's thinking and I agree with the thinking. I think that might be part of the mindset at wide receiver. At safety, you could see an early pick. There's certainly a lot of good prospects at the safety position. So that's another area that easily could be addressed early. I don't know that you're going to see a linebacker, though. I think you may see a defensive end because that's another position which, in all honesty, I can't criticize the Jets because I don't know that there was any good defensive ends available in free agency. But linebacker, it sounds like they like the guys that they got. So I think they're going to stay where they are. But yes, I do think that there was maybe an eye towards the draft when they addressed the positions that they addressed in free agency. I definitely think that there probably was some strategy involved in that. That they decided, you know what, these are the positions we're not going to be able to draft guys, so we'll go hard after them in free agency. And these are the positions we feel like we can address in the draft. I think that's probably something that happened. Our next question: am I crazy to be incredibly disappointed the Jets did not make a larger play for Robert Woods? He was cheap in draft capital and would have fit right in the slot. He's a great scheme fit and a really good blocker for those outside runs. I got to be honest with you, as much as I don't love what the Jets have done at receiver, Robert Woods was not a name that excited me. You got a guy who's, 30 years old, coming off a serious injury, and honestly, the productivity has been very up and down during his career. I mean, there were other guys I wanted, and I did want a veteran in the trade market or free agency. I mean, would I have taken him? I guess, but the deal went down. I think it was Saturday. That was not his day where I was like, man, how did the Jets miss out on this guy? I mean, you're not crazy for having wanted him, but this was not a guy that really excited me that much. Maybe the Jets would be a better group the Jets would have a better group at receiver if they had gotten Robert Woods, absolutely, but I can't go crazy over that. However, the Jets do need to address their playmaker situation on offense. As we continue this weekly mailbag here on Locked On Jets, I'll answer a question about what the Jets should be looking to add as far as playmakers go in the NFL draft. Of course, Joe Douglas is looking to fix the Jets roster this offseason, and if you're looking to fix your car or truck, go to rockauto.com. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto, and with the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, so go to rockauto.com. You save time and money while using them. It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Mailbag Wednesday. Our next question comes from Joe. John, what do the Jets need to do in the draft for you to feel like they have enough offensive support around Wilson for his second season? Is a wide receiver at 10 enough? I mean, if they don't even add a receiver at 10, then I think it's going to be very difficult to even make the argument. I personally don't think it's enough for the reasons I laid out earlier in the show. I think that the Jets need to do more. I mean, to be honest with you, I think a minimum of 2 playmakers in the first 2 days of this draft, and maybe one of them's a running back. I've, as much as like I de-emphasize the running back position, there are some guys in this draft who could be home run hitters, a Breece Hall out of Iowa State or a Walker out of Michigan State. Guys who can be big play threats, and maybe the strategy is, instead of investing at receiver, with the addition of Laken Tomlinson, I know they added a couple tight ends. Maybe the focus is on running the ball and trying to protect Wilson and keep him out of bad downs and distances. And, again, that's not my preferred strategy, but if you're going to do that, then maybe you want to get a big play running back in there in addition to a wide receiver. But, at the very least, I think there got to be 2 playmakers, and maybe you double dip at the wide receiver position, knowing how difficult it is to expect production out of a rookie. If you give yourself 2 wide receivers who are rookies, then you double your chances of finding an immediate contributor. So, to me, it's like, I don't know that there's anything they can do that will convince me the Jets have surrounded Zach Wilson with enough playmakers. But if you add 2 guys, then I'll at least say, okay, I see the path here. Especially, maybe if you go running back, then maybe they're going to try and do it a different way than you conventionally would think. So I guess that might be the approach. But I think there have to be at least 2 playmakers. Next question. With the signings Joe Douglas has made the last 2 weeks, will we see the coaching staff change their play calling and overall philosophies compared with next year? Well, I think on the offensive side of the ball, this is kind of a signal they want to continue what they were doing, but do it a little bit better, because the tight ends they brought in are guys who are pretty good after the catch. And I think, if you look at the way they used the tight end position last year, that's kind of how they wanted guys to go out short patterns, catch the ball, and get up the field. So from that standpoint, the tight end situation, it makes sense. Laken Tomlinson is a good fit for the scheme the Jets are running because he comes from San Francisco where they run a very similar scheme. The change might be on the defensive side of the ball because they went after DJ Reed, the corner. And there's been lots of talk about how Saleh has de-emphasized corner. In fact, I'm one of the people who's provided you with that talk. So maybe we'll see a little bit more aggressive play at the corner position, more press coverage, which means that you need less out of your safeties and your linebackers. So I think maybe on the offensive side of the ball, I think what we saw suggests that they're going to be staying very status quo. Whereas on the defensive side of the ball, maybe there will be some changes. And our last question, can we expect the Jets to get any compensatory draft picks this year? So the way the compensatory draft pick system works is that teams that lose more than they gain in free agency get extra draft picks. And I think it's pretty clear for the Jets, that's not going to happen because the Jets have added more than they've lost. But there's a great website, and this is a website that's a great resource for not just compensatory picks, but all kinds of questions about the way the NFL works. It's overthecap.com, and they actually have a page where they project compensatory picks. So I'll take you through what they have to say. The Jets losing Foley Fatukasi would give them a compensatory 5th-round pick. And losing Marcus May, Morgan Moses, and Jamison Crowder, these are moves that would give the Jets compensatory 6th-round picks, all 3 of them. So right now you'd be looking after the guys you lost, the 4 guys you lost, Fatukasi, May, Moses, and Crowder. You'd be looking at 4 draft picks, 4 compensatory picks. 1 in the 5th round, 3 in the 6th. But the Jets have signed players, and whenever you sign a player, it cancels out a player that you lose in the system. So signing DJ Reed cancels out the 5th-round pick for Foley Fatukasi. Signing Tyler Conklin cancels out the 6th-round pick for Marcus May. Signing Jacob Martin from Houston cancels out the 6th-round pick for Morgan Moses. And signing Laken Tomlinson cancels out the 6th-round pick for Jamison Crowder. So because the Jets have signed more than they've lost, no compensatory picks. It cancels out the gains. By signing a player, you cancel out the gains you make by losing a player. And in addition to that, even if the Jets were to lose 2 more players, Jordan Whitehead and CJ Uzama would cancel out the picks the Jets would get for those players. So that's just the way the system works. If you're a bad team, you're not going to get compensatory picks because would it make any sense to not sign free agents to get like a 5th-round pick or a 6th-round pick? Not really. This is a system that's kind of built in to benefit the good teams, the teams that are going to lose players. So that the Jets are not going to be in a position where they get a compensatory pick this year. And that's just the way it is. You hope that at one point the Jets get good enough that they'll start losing more players than they gain because that's a sign you're a good team. But it's not going to happen this year. And that's whenever your team's spending big in free agency, you're just not going to get compensatory picks. And one other note, it's kind of irrelevant because the Jets aren't getting any of them. But one thing I just should clarify, what happens this year as far as compensatory picks goes, that impacts the 2023 draft. The compensatory picks are awarded for the year after the free agency happens. So the teams that are getting compensatory picks this year, that's based on what happened in 2021 free agency. So just something to keep in mind going forward. But that's all for our show today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you for your questions. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it. Leave it a good review if you're watching on a podcast. If you're listening on a podcast source. And if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a thumbs up. It helps the channel and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.